Good morning. I'm just trying to sort out my world a little bit here. We're in a hectic time of year. I've been at 2 college graduations now. 7 of our young people graduated from Bible college, and then weddings, and on top of weddings, just life. Planning the summer. We've got college students coming home to help for the summer, and a good group of college students will be back home. Some working their secular job and then helping out in bus routes and soul winning, and others. We've got a few of them that are going to be here a lot, not full time, but quite a bit. So it's a neat thing having young people. And I got to sit on Wednesday night and see 6 of our young people get diplomas and some awards for some things, and one of our young people, 2 of our young people are traveling with tour groups, one boy, one girl, and one of our girls is traveling with a Spanish tour group. And I was thinking about how good God's been to us. People can think what they want about fundamental Bible believing Christianity, with the people that are literalists. The Bible is literally true, and it is our final authority in all matters of faith and practice. But as much as anybody wants to grumble about it, usually it's a lifestyle grumble. They don't like a literal, authoritative Bible belief because it's going to affect their life. And that is what Jesus said. He said, "Why call you me Lord, Lord, and do not the things that I say?" But if anybody chooses on occasion to be a critic, and most people aren't, we've got a great life. But I was able to travel up to the graduation this week with one of our young men who's new on our staff, and his mother. I met her, I'm going to say 30 years ago or somewhere close to that, and his dad was at our second service as a little boy 40 years ago. And I sit and look at second and third generation families, and then at the graduation this week, there were 6 families that were there. That all the kids are in church doing well. Most of them graduated from Bible college, and parents are active and faithful, serving God in one church or another. Most of them in our church, but I just sit and enjoying seeing family after family, and there's all the kids busy for God and happy. They're sober. They're not out partying, playing the fool, chasing the empty satanic promises of the devil. And there's trials serving God. Let's be honest. We all know you're living on a sin-cursed earth, and you got the devil as an enemy, the world around you is an enemy, and then your own flesh is an enemy. So there's going to be trouble. But also, God's working on us. He's trying to conform us to the image of Christ. And we've got a Heavenly Father whose goal is to conform us to the image of Christ. So over in Romans 8, he says all things work together for good. We know that. For them that love God, for them who are called according to his purpose. So that's the things that go on. God's going to use them for his glory. But it says, for whom he did foreknow, them he also did predestinate to be conformed to the image of his Son. And so these trials, these pressures that you face, these burdens, God is going to make all these things work together for good, because he knew you would get saved, so he foreordained that you would be Christ-like. And some of us have got a long ways to go, and there's some rough spots, and there's doubt and worry. I would love to say that I can just look up to heaven no matter what happens and say, God, you're always good, and I trust you with this. But there's days I get fretting with things like anybody else does. That's our old flesh. And Paul said, there's a war inside him. He said, that what I would do, I don't do, and that which I don't want to do, that I do. And these battles of our old flesh, and sometimes we're drawn away to our old life and our old ways, like Demas forsook Paul, having loved this present world. So you're going to face that battle. I've been at it going on 50 years, just to 47 years now, and the battle sometimes gets more severe because I think God's buffing the rough spots off and working. He's working from the outside in, and so he begins to work on motives. He begins to work on attitudes and response and our feelings and can we bless those who persecute us and can we have an accident or a sickness and say that, like the man born blind, where Jesus said, this is for the glory of God. And this is a great thing, that God is going to be honored and glorified through this. This is an adult man, blind all his life. And can the man just say, I'm here for your glory? Could the parents say, our son that's born blind, he's here for your glory? And no, that's mature Christianity. Beating a cigarette or a bottle of beer, man. If you're still battling the battle of booze and smoking and casinos or whatever, keep battling. But I can tell you the battle's going to get bigger when you start dealing with fear and worry and trust and rest and faith. The Bible talks about rest in the Lord, wait patiently for him. But I sit and look at these families, young people growing up, doing right, loving God, and moms and dads seeing their kids on track, and moms and dads and kids and their spouse and their grandkids who like each other, who enjoy being together. And one of our young people, born here at our church and raised and have been working in a church in another state. Now he's coming out. He's got his house on the market to move to California to start a church. And people don't move to California. They take their equity and leave California. But here, a young man starting a church somewhere in our area, close enough that we're all going to be able to be involved. And if you want to be a help, if you're not a part of our church, you want to be a help of a church plant getting started in Southern California, give me a call, send me a text or an email or whatever. There's not many people starting churches, not many young people with the dare and the assurance that this is the will of God, and we need them. We need churches. If you would think to pray for him, that we get a building. There's 2 buildings in the area we're considering that are empty church buildings. So they'd be already permitted. They'd already be legal. Wouldn't be a lot of hoops to jump through with the legal areas. And we're just praying. But if you think to pray for them, if you do that, that'd be good. Hey, this morning, I want to look at Jeremiah 17 with you and just a couple of verses on this. I guess it's a pretty obvious thought. And I'm just scribbling a note here so I don't forget. But Jeremiah chapter 17 and down at verse 11, it says, as a partridge sitteth on eggs, and hatcheth them not, so he that getteth riches, and not by right, shall leave them in the midst of his days, and at his end shall be a fool. We all think about money, and I doubt there's any of us who haven't one day thought, I wouldn't mind having a big old chunk of money, and I don't know that there's anything I want. I think I've got everything I want, but I would love to have money to send to this guy and say, go help people start churches, and send money to this guy and say, start some building projects for some missionaries, and I'd love to do that. But you know what? God has the money. He can send it straight to those people. He doesn't need me. He can use men, but he knows what we need, and he can take care of us. But so talking about money, but today the unrighteous gain of money. And if you look there at that verse again, as a partridge sitteth on eggs and hatcheth them not. So this partridge sits on those eggs and they never hatch. It's hopeful. It's putting time and energy into these eggs and they don't hatch. There's no baby partridges. And he says that's what it's like for the person who will get riches, but not by right. He says that, number one, they're going to leave them in the midst of their days, and number two, at his end, he'll be a fool. So those riches aren't going to last. And number two, you're going to end up a fool. Because when we're motivated by money, we end up a fool every time. And we ought to, as the people of God, take very serious heed to the passage, labor not to be rich, in Proverbs. We shouldn't put a bunch of time and energy into gathering wealth. We need to work. We need to go to work and pay the bills and maybe work a side job now and then or whatever to pick up some extra when things are tight. Of course, that's a part. If a man doesn't work, neither should he eat. But it was the idea of wealth. And wealth gotten by vanity shall be diminished. We'll look at that in a minute. God places a great priority on us working and doing our part. And of course, he blesses and he cares. He gives us health. He gives us opportunities. He gives us knowledge and instruction. He gives us skills and all those things. But most of the time in the Bible, when he talks about stuff like this, he wants us to work. Go work and pay your bills. Over in Thessalonians, he really scolds the people. If a man doesn't work, neither should he eat. If a man won't obey our word by this epistle, note that man have no company with him. He's saying separate from a brother who doesn't go to work. And of course, there's not talking about when we get old, not talking about when people that are crippled and things like that. But go back. So here in verse 11, a hopeless person putting this time and energy into this thing and no fruit from it, sows he that getteth riches and not by right. There's a lot of people seek gain in not a righteous manner. And they'll face God for it. It's not my business, not your business. But for us, let's keep our thinking toward money true. And let's keep it scriptural. What'll happen? You'll leave it in the midst of your days, and in the end shall be a fool. That is a terrible thing. Proverbs chapter 13, it talks a little bit about this, and it's a verse I quoted earlier. Proverbs 13:11, wealth gotten by vanity shall be diminished, but he that gathereth by labor shall increase. And so he says, you get money through vain methods. That's a very broad statement. You say, what's that mean? Well, you ask God. Think about it. And let's make sure we're getting our money through labor. The opposite is vanity or labor. He that gathereth by labor shall increase. So you've got getting money because of hard work of your brain, work of your hands, work of your whatever skills you might have. That's one. Or there's vain gain. It's empty gain. And there's a very, very serious warning there in that. Go over to chapter 20, well, right there in chapter 13, verse 22. A good man leaveth inheritance to his children's children. So it's interesting. It's the grandkids, because you give it to your kids, you probably ruin them. But it's okay to lay some money up for your grandkids. That's what he said. God says. But what kind of inheritance? A name, character, a reputation, a godly family, godly parents, things. But also, I think there's a physical inheritance. But the end of verse 22, the wealth of the sinner is laid up for the just. And there's people who got their money in vain ways. And God says that money, that's going to help the just. That money's going to come around and you'll lose it. But look over to chapter 20 and Proverbs 20 down at verse 21. And he says, an inheritance may be gotten hastily at the beginning, but the end thereof shall not be blessed. Oh, we got to be very careful about an inheritance. And money just dumped on somebody. It may be gotten in a hasty manner at the beginning, but it won't be blessed. And we ought to prayerfully consider what we do and what we do with our money. And as we get older, whatever, if God has blessed us with something financial, let's be very careful what we do with it. And put it in places where it will be prudently used and where it won't hurt people, because a lot of money hurts people. And I heard a story this week of a church that was given a bunch of money, and that church had prospered and thrived. They'd lived on nickel and dimes and dollars and $100 offerings and, 1,000 here and 500 there. And they just, as a church, they pooled their resources and prayed and sought God and all the blessings. And then they got a big influx of money. Well, people quit giving their dollars and $5 and they quit needing to have their fundraisers. And what happened is the heart of the people, we don't know, can't read anyone's mind, but it seems as if something went wrong spiritually, and then the church is no more. And a very, very sad thing. Wealth without getting by right, wealth gotten by vanity shall be diminished. Over a couple of pages over, Proverbs chapter 28. And it's not just a thought just one time in the Bible. It's in the Bible a lot. And Proverbs chapter 28 and down at verse 8. He that by usury, that's like interest, and unjust gain increases his substance shall gather it for him that will pity the poor. And don't make your money off of the people of God. He that by usury, or by unjust gain. Oh, be sure that what we get it in an honest and decent way, that we're not embarrassed about it, that we work, that we care, that we provide, that we maybe invest wisely. But oh, be careful. That money will destroy you or your children or our grandchildren, perhaps. And we ought to be so careful. I think I told this story before about a church member. The pastor wanted to have a big spring program, and he said, "Why don't we get some money together? We'll buy some fun stuff for the kids and ride the buses." And this guy, he came to the pastor with a bunch of money, and wow, this is great. Pastor didn't ask where he got it. Well, he worked at a bank, and he'd gotten this many, many years ago. And it's just a story I heard. I don't know the validity of all of it. This is how I heard it, that he'd embezzled money from this bank. Well, the next program came around, and pastors were trying to raise money. He got more money. Well, I don't know, 1, 2, 3 times he got money to help with a promotion and providing buses and things, and then he went to jail, and everything fell apart, of course. And we need to understand, no matter how good a deed you're doing with your money, if you got it by wrong, it's still wrong. And don't think God's going to bless wrong because you do something. You don't think that drug lords and gangsters don't buy birthday presents for their kids or their grandkids or maybe the mailman or whatever. We had some family from Iraq that were riding our buses many years ago when Saddam Hussein was in the power, and they said that Saddam Hussein had come by their church at Christmas time and bring gifts for the children. And who knows why he was doing it, trying to cultivate favor with the common men, or who knows what. But wherever he got his money, it probably wasn't right. But just because you do something good with your money you stole doesn't mean you didn't steal the money. And so thinking back to that verse in Jeremiah, he that getteth riches and not by right shall leave them in the midst of his days, and in his end shall be a fool. What a tragedy that you're going to end up. If we find a way to connive and get this money that's not proper, we're going to end up a fool. We're going to lose the money, and we're going to end up a fool. And the Bible says the eyes of the Lord run to and fro in all the earth. He sees the righteous, he sees the unrighteous. And let's humbly walk with God. We don't have to have a lot of money, but we ought to want to please him and to do the right thing. And I want to encourage you. And just a couple of thoughts with money. You have to decide what you want to do. This is what I think and what I encourage people to do. I think we ought to tithe off the money we get. And we ought to our church. I think to your church is very important. I don't pay at Taco Bell for food I got at McDonald's. And if it's your church, don't send money to our church. Don't send your tithe to our church when you go to another church. I had a guy one day, one of our buses was broke down, and or maybe it might have been a lady, but someone came by, and our mechanic had a bus at his house. He's working on it there. And somebody came by and said, "Hey, I'd like to our church doesn't have any buses, and I love what your buses do. Could I just give you the money to fix the bus?" And I told him, I said, "No, I'd really rather you go to your pastor, because he may have a need for that money, and God gave it to you. You remember that church, and God gave the money to you to meet that need that your pastor's praying for." I said, "So I'd prefer you go talk to your pastor." Well, they came back, a few days, week later, whatever it was, and said, "Oh, I talked to the pastor. He said it's fine, give it to you." Well, at that point, I took it. But I'm not going to take from another church. I'm not going to take from another church family or man of God that's praying and seeking God's will. And this wasn't a church I'd have gone to. It's a church way different from us. But I think it was a gospel preaching church. But let's be very careful that what we get in an honorable fashion, and that we're not embarrassed, and that we please God with not only what we get, but how we spend it as well. So I tell people it's tithe, and then after that, give offerings. Think about your bus ministry or your building fund or your missionaries. Oh, let's give to foreign missions, and let's invest in the gospel to the world. And so first your tithe, then your offering. Malachi 3 talks about we've robbed God from tithes and offerings. So the offering's separate. And then think about people who I'm going to use the word we owe. Who's been good to you that you might be able to do something? It could be an elderly parent. It could be a friend, a neighbor, maybe somebody in your church on staff. Most church staff members don't get paid very much, and you just like to put a $20 bill or a $100 bill or whatever more in a card and just say thanks for serving our church, and stick that in their hand when you walk by them at church, and be a blessing. be a blessing to somebody, and we don't want to die and leave all this money piled up for who knows who to get it. And Ecclesiastes talks about that. It's the vanity of dying and having all this wealth gained up. You don't get built up. You don't even know who's going to spend it, whether it be a fool or wise. And so let's be wise. I think everybody ought to put God in their will or their living trust. Take a chunk of you can put it all in whatever between you and God. But if I died, I would, of course, everything would be my wife's if I died first. But if we both died, I want to make sure the church gets a chunk of that. It's God who gave it all to me, and I don't mind giving some to my children. I'm not going to give them to kids who aren't following the Lord. I'm not gonna leave money that God gave me to a child who's chasing after the things of this flesh. But kids who are faithful Christians, whatever career, doesn't matter. It's just if they love the Lord, and I'd want to give something to my kids or my grandkids or whatever. But I'd want to put some of this in missions and put this in maybe the Christian school to help get some kids tuition paid or whatever. But consider your money continuing to work for you while you're in heaven. What a pleasant thing it'd be to be in heaven, look down and see the money you left is now helping some missionary with a great work. And let's be a blessing. Let's get our money in an honorable way, and let's spend it in an honorable way.